I'm Camille, and this is the story of how my life took an unexpected turn. It all started when I was just a bright-eyed college student, full of dreams and ambitions. I was studying to become a financial analyst, and that's where I met him, Mark. Mark was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Smart, charming, and as ambitious as I was. We hit it off immediately, spending hours talking about our future plans and how we'd conquer the world together. It wasn't long before we decided to get married, right there in college. And so, our journey began. Mark set his sights on becoming a university professor, while I aimed for a position in a large investment company. We were young, in love, and ready to take on the world. After graduation, things started falling into place. Mark landed a teaching position at the university, and I secured a job as a financial analyst at a reputable investment firm. We were ecstatic, feeling like we were on the right path to achieving our dreams. In those early days, Mark's career took off like a rocket. He quickly became one of the most popular young professors at the university. Students loved his engaging teaching style, and his colleagues respected his intellect. I couldn't have been prouder. Meanwhile, I was quietly making progress in my own career. I threw myself into my work, analyzing financial data, creating reports, and slowly but surely climbing the corporate ladder. It wasn't as flashy as Mark's rising star, but I was content. As time went on, Mark became more involved in the university's social life. He was often invited to give interviews, attend faculty events, and spend extra time with his students. This meant he was frequently home late, but I understood. After all, we had agreed that our careers would come first. "Sorry I'm late again, Camille," he'd say, rushing through the door at 9 p.m. The students had so many questions after the lecture, and then the dean wanted to chat. I'd smile and say, "Don't worry about it. I'm just glad you're making such an impact." One evening, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, Mark looked at me curiously. "How's your job going, by the way? Still crunching numbers?" I hesitated for a moment. I had recently been promoted to senior analyst, but I hadn't mentioned it to Mark. Somehow, it felt wrong to steal his thunder. "Oh, same old," I replied with a shrug. "How about you? Any exciting news?" And just like that, the conversation shifted back to his world, his achievements, his plans. I listened and nodded, playing the role of the supportive wife perfectly. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something wasn't quite right. As the years rolled by, my career at the investment company began to take off. It wasn't an easy journey. Late nights, endless spreadsheets, and high-pressure meetings became my norm. But I loved every minute of it. One evening, I came home buzzing with excitement. "Mark, you won't believe it. I've been promoted to head of finance." Mark looked up from his laptop, his expression unreadable. "That's nice, honey. More responsibility, I suppose?" I felt my smile falter. "Well, yes. And a significant pay raise too." He nodded absently. "That's good. Hey, did I tell you about the paper I'm publishing next month?" And just like that, the conversation shifted back to his world. I pushed down my disappointment and listened attentively as he went on about his latest academic achievements. As time went on, I noticed a shift in our dynamic. My income had begun to surpass Mark's, and it seemed to bother him more than I expected. One night, after a few drinks, he brought it up. "Camille, I've been thinking. I need to find ways to earn more," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's not right that you're making more than me." I was taken aback. "Mark, what are you talking about? It's our money, our family budget. It doesn't matter who earns what." He scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one feeling inadequate." His words stung. I tried to reassure him, to make him understand that his worth wasn't tied to his paycheck, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. Meanwhile, our financial situation was improving rapidly. We bought a beautiful house, 2 cars, and even invested in some apartments. Our bank accounts were growing, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect power couple. But behind closed doors, things were far from perfect. Mark's jealousy of my achievements grew, casting a shadow over our relationship. He began to drink more, often coming home late smelling of alcohol. One night, he stumbled in, his eyes bloodshot. "Guess what, Camille? They picked some middle-aged woman for the dean position instead of me. That woman must be sleeping with the rector. It's the only explanation." I was shocked by his assumption. "Mark, that's a terrible thing to say. Maybe she was just more qualified?" He turned on me, his eyes flashing with anger. "What, you think I'm dumber than her? Is that it?" "Of course not," I backpedaled. "You're the smartest person I know." He laughed bitterly. "Right. Well, I'm smart enough to know how women get ahead in this world." Through the bedroom. The implication hung heavy in the air. I felt my cheeks burn with anger and hurt. "Is that what you think about me too?" But Mark had already turned away, stumbling towards the spare bedroom. "I'm sleeping here tonight," he mumbled, slamming the door behind him. I stood there in the hallway, feeling like I'd been slapped. Was this really the man I had married? The brilliant, ambitious partner I thought I knew? As weeks turned into months, Mark's behavior continued to worsen. His drinking became more frequent, and his bitterness about his career seemed to consume him. I tried everything I could think of to help him. "Mark, what about some personal development courses?" I asked one evening, watching him pour his third glass of whiskey. "They might give you new perspectives, help you advance your career." His eyes flashed with anger. "Why don't you mind your own damn business?" "I don't need your charity or your condescension." I recoiled, hurt by his harsh words. "I'm just trying to help, Mark. I hate seeing you like this." "Then stop looking," he spat, storming out of the room. Meanwhile, my own career continued to flourish. I was developing financial models for new projects, making projections about investment returns, and my voice was becoming increasingly influential in major company decisions. But every success felt tainted by the knowledge of how it would affect Mark. One night, I had to stay late for an important meeting. I texted Mark to let him know, but in the rush of finalizing presentations and crunching last-minute numbers, I forgot to check if he'd responded. When I finally got home, well past midnight, I found Mark waiting in the living room. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of alcohol hit me like a wall. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, his words slightly slurred. "I'm so sorry, Mark. The meeting ran late, and then we had to revise some figures, and..." He cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you were very busy. Staying late with your bosses, were you? All your promotions, your success, you're sleeping with them, aren't you?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "How dare you?" I whispered, tears springing to my eyes. "How can you think so little of me?" "How else do you explain it?" he shouted. "Women like you, you're all the same. Using your bodies to get ahead while hardworking men like me get left behind." I couldn't bear to hear any more. "We'll talk about this in the morning when you're sober," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But Mark wasn't finished. He launched into a tirade, blaming me for everything: his stalled career, our childless state, his unfulfilled dreams. Every word was like a knife, cutting deep into the heart of our relationship. "Maybe we should see a marriage counselor," I suggested weakly, when he finally paused for breath. He laughed humorlessly. "A counselor won't fix this, Camille. I need to be alone. I can't stand the sight of you right now." With that, he grabbed his keys and stormed out, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our home. I didn't sleep that night. I called Mark repeatedly, but he never picked up. When morning came, I dragged myself to work, feeling like a shell of myself. I was distracted all day, my mind replaying Mark's cruel words over and over again. Then, in an ironic twist of fate, my boss called me into his office. "Camille," he said, smiling broadly, "I have some exciting news. We want you to represent the company at the International Investment Forum in Paris next month. It's a huge opportunity. I arrived home that evening with a mix of anticipation and dread. The house was quiet as I entered, and for a moment, I wondered if Mark was even home. Then I heard the clink of a glass from the living room. Taking a deep breath, I stepped in. Mark was there, nursing what looked like his usual whiskey. "Mark," I began cautiously. "Something happened at work today. I've been invited to represent our company at the International Investment Forum in Paris next month." I watched his face carefully, hoping to see a hint of pride or happiness for me. Instead, his expression hardened. "Paris? And you're going, I suppose?" "Well, yes. It's a huge opportunity for my career, for my future. For our future." He stood up abruptly. "No, this is about you choosing your job over your marriage. Again." "That's not fair," I protested. "You've never had a problem focusing on your career. Why is it different when it's mine?" "Because you're my wife," he shouted. "Your place is here, with me, not halfway across the world schmoozing with businessmen." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "My place? Are you serious right now?" Mark's face was red with anger. "Dead serious. You need to make a choice, Camille. Right now. It's either me or this trip. You can't have both." I stared at him, shocked by the ultimatum. This man, who I'd supported through every career move, every late night at the university, was now asking me to give up a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And for what? To soothe his bruised ego? In that moment, looking at the stranger my husband had become, I made my decision. "I'm going to Paris, Mark." His face contorted with rage. Without a word, he stormed out of the room. A few minutes later, he returned, slapping a stack of papers on the coffee table. "What's this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Divorce papers," he spat. "Since your career is clearly more important to you than our marriage, let's just end this charade." I picked up the papers with trembling hands. Part of me wanted to tear them up, to beg him to reconsider. But a stronger part, a part that had been silenced for too long, knew this was the right thing to do. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll take these with me to Paris. We can discuss it when I get back." With the divorce papers tucked safely in my briefcase and a heart heavy with conflicting emotions, I left for Paris the next morning. Mark didn't even bother to say goodbye. The International Investment Forum was everything I had hoped for and more. I found myself surrounded by brilliant minds from all over the world, discussing cutting-edge financial strategies and global economic trends. It was exhilarating. On the third day of the conference, I met Jacques, a charming French investor who took an interest in my work. "Your analysis of emerging markets is fascinating, Camille," he said over coffee. "Have you considered publishing your findings?" I laughed, somewhat embarrassed. "Oh, I don't know. I'm just doing my job." Jacques shook his head. Non, this is more than just a job. You have a gift, my dear. You shouldn't hide it." His words struck a chord in me. How long had I been downplaying my achievements, making myself smaller to fit into the role of the supportive wife? As the days passed, I found myself opening up, sharing ideas more freely, and even leading a few impromptu discussions. People listened to me, valued my opinions. It was intoxicating. As the forum drew to a close, I was approached by Sophia, the CEO of a prestigious international firm. "Camille," she said, her eyes twinkling with interest, "I've been watching your work this week. How would you feel about joining our team in London?" I was stunned. "London? I don't know what to say." Sophia smiled. "You don't have to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. But I believe you could do great things with us." As I packed my bags on the last night in Paris, my mind was reeling. The job offer in London, the divorce papers in my briefcase, the life I had left behind in the States, it all swirled in my head like a chaotic storm. I looked out the window at the twinkling lights of Paris. 2 weeks ago, I had arrived here feeling lost and conflicted. Now, I was leaving with a clearer sense of who I was and what I was capable of. As I boarded the plane back to the States, I clutched my briefcase close. Inside were not just the divorce papers, but notes from the conference, business cards from new connections, and the job offer from Sophia. It felt like I was carrying my past and my potential future, all in one hand. The flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Welcome aboard. We'll be departing for New York shortly." The familiar sights of home greeted me as I stepped out of the taxi, but everything felt different. I was different. With a deep breath, I unlocked the front door, bracing myself for whatever awaited me inside. To my surprise, Mark was there, sitting in the living room as if nothing had changed. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Welcome back," he said, his tone oddly casual. "How was Paris?" I hesitated, caught off guard by his apparent calm. "It was enlightening," I replied carefully. Mark nodded, then stood up and approached me. For a moment, I thought he might hug me, but he stopped short. "Listen, Camille, I've been thinking while you were gone. I think we got off on the wrong foot before you left." My heart raced. Was he about to apologize? To try and make amends? "I'm willing to forgive you," he continued, and my hope deflated instantly. "We can start over, put all this behind us. But there need to be some changes." I felt my jaw clench. "What kind of changes?" "For starters, you need to quit your job," he said, as if it was the most reasonable request in the world. "It's clear that it's causing problems in our marriage. If you stay home, focus on our relationship, everything will be better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Quit my job? Mark, that's insane. My career is important to me. It's part of who I am." His face hardened. "More important than our marriage? Than me?" "That's not fair," I protested. "Why should I have to choose?" "Because I'm your husband," he shouted, his calm facade cracking. "I'm sick of coming second to your ambition. It's time you remembered your place and started acting like a proper wife." In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the frustration, the resentment, the pain of the past months came flooding out. "My place?" I spat back. "And where exactly is that, Mark? Beneath you? Sacrificing everything I've worked for just to stroke your ego?" His face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little thing. After everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I interrupted, my voice rising to match his. "What about everything I've done for you? I've supported you, cheered you on, put your needs before mine for years. And this is how you repay me? With ultimatums and insults?" Mark's eyes widened in shock. I had never spoken to him like this before. Always, I had been the peacemaker, the one to smooth things over. But not anymore. "You know what?" I said, reaching into my briefcase. "I think you're right about one thing. There do need to be changes." I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them on the coffee table. "I've signed them. Now it's your turn." Mark stared at the papers, then back at me. "You can't be serious," he sputtered. "I've never been more serious in my life," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We're done, Mark. I won't let you bully me or belittle me anymore." His face turned an alarming shade of red. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "I'll make sure you lose everything. Your job, your reputation, everything." I stood my ground, even as fear coursed through me. "Go ahead and try. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With a roar of frustration, Mark swept the papers off the table and stormed out of the room. I heard the front door slam a moment later. As the silence settled around me, I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly weak. I had done it. After years of compromising, of making myself smaller, I had finally stood up for myself. But as the adrenaline faded, anxiety crept in. What would Mark do now? How far would he go to make good on his threats? The next morning, I did what I had been mentally prepared for a long time. The moment I stepped into Sarah's law office, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Sarah, my longtime friend turned lawyer, greeted me with a concerned smile. "Camille," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'm glad you called. Tell me everything." I took a deep breath and began recounting the events of the past few weeks, Mark's ultimatum, his threats, the divorce papers. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. "And now he's threatening to destroy my career," I finished, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes serious. "Camille, given the nature of his threats, I think we need to dig deeper. Have you considered hiring a private investigator to look into Mark's activities?" I couldn't help it, I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, Sarah," I said, reaching for my bag, "I'm way ahead of you on that one." I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on her desk. "I hired a PI a few months ago. The results, well, they're not pretty." Sarah's eyebrows shot up as she opened the folder. We spent the next hour poring over its contents, and with each page, I watched Sarah's expression shift from shock to disbelief to something akin to triumph. The folder contained a damning collection of evidence against Mark. There were emails and recorded conversations revealing how he had manipulated and undermined his colleagues in his desperate bid to become dean. It was clear that his underhanded tactics had backfired spectacularly. The rector had gotten wind of his behavior and had deliberately chosen the woman Mark had so vehemently criticized for the position instead. But that wasn't the worst of it. As we delved deeper into the folder, we uncovered evidence of Mark's multiple affairs with his students. There were photos, videos, and even audio recordings that left no doubt about his infidelity. "The university knew," I explained, my voice hollow. "But they decided to cover it up to protect their reputation. Can you believe it?" Sarah looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Camille, this changes everything. With this evidence, we're not just going to win the divorce case. We're going to make sure Mark never threatens you or your career again." As we began to strategize, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had been carrying the burden of this knowledge alone for so long, afraid to use it, afraid of the consequences. But now, with Sarah by my side and a clear plan forming, I finally felt like I was taking control of my life again. The 2 weeks leading up to the trial were some of the most stressful of my life. Mark ramped up his campaign of intimidation. My phone buzzed constantly with his threats and demands. "You'll be left with nothing, Camille," he snarled in one voicemail. "I'll make sure you're penniless and disgraced." Another day, his tone shifted to a disturbing plea. "Come back to me, baby. Be a good wife. Stay at home, and I'll forgive everything. Just do what I say." Each message made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to record and document every word. Sarah had advised me to keep a detailed log of his behavior, and I followed her instructions to the letter. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. As we entered the courtroom, I saw Mark for the first time in weeks. He looked confident, even smug, as he took his seat. His lawyer leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and they both chuckled. The proceedings began, and Mark's attorney painted a picture of me as a gold digger, someone who had used Mark for his status and now wanted to rob him blind. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "Mrs. Thompson is simply jealous of my client's successful career. This divorce is nothing more than an attempt to cash in on his hard work." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to remain calm. Sarah squeezed my hand reassuringly. Then it was our turn. Sarah stood, her posture radiating confidence. "Your Honor, we have evidence that paints a very different picture of this marriage and Mr. Thompson's character." What followed was a systematic dismantling of Mark's facade. Sarah presented the emails showing his underhanded tactics at work, the audio recordings of his threats against me, and finally, the damning evidence of his affairs with students. I watched as the color drained from Mark's face. He began to tremble, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an escape route. His lawyer looked shell-shocked, frantically whispering in Mark's ear. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern as she reviewed the evidence. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold with disapproval. "In light of this evidence, I find Mr. Thompson's behavior reprehensible," she declared. "The court rules in favor of Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson will pay financial compensation for his infidelity, and all marital assets will be divided equally." The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind. News of Mark's affairs spread quickly, and the university was forced to address the scandal. Despite their previous attempts to cover it up, they had no choice but to terminate Mark's contract. His reputation in academia was in tatters. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. My boss, impressed by my resilience and professional conduct throughout the ordeal, offered me the position of CFO. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Sarah. She grinned when she saw me. "Look at you, CFO Thompson. How does it feel?" I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my chest. "It feels right, Sarah. For the first time in a long time, everything feels right." As we walked together, chatting about the future, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had passed, and I had not only survived but emerged stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I was ready to face them head-on.